Oh, you're here.
I'm
Hi.
here.
Okay.
Hi.
Hi. Okay. So before we just continue, I'm gonna turn off commenting and request to go live, not because of some sort of censorship, but just because it's gonna go on YouTube this next week, so it's less distracting. Okay. So I'm so happy whenever it works because Instagram Live can sometimes give us trouble.
Of course.
Welcome everyone. This is Good Talk, New Lines Magazine's Instagram Live series of conversations. My name is Riyad Akil. This is episode 13. So excited to join, not to join, to have Elamin Abdelmahmoud with me today. He's a Canadian Sudanese journalist, author, the host of CBS's weekly pop culture podcast, Pop Chat, co-host of political podcast, Party Lies. Is that correct as well? What a great mix. And a frequent culture commentator and also a senior culture writer for BuzzFeed News, where he also writes every morning newsletter Incoming. He's also an author of memoir, Son of Elsewhere, which I read so fast because it's so good. And we're here to talk about it today. Great to have you today with us, Elamin. Are you in Toronto right now?
I sure am. Yeah.
Okay, welcome. Well, I have some family close by, but I haven't been there in a while. So, yeah, I have great, all the best about Toronto and Canada. So, Elamin, this
Yes.
memoir is a collection of essays about you, your family, and all that experience of moving to Canada from Sudan at age of 12, and what it meant for your life. So, in some of the first pages, you offer a sort of invitation and kind of a hand, a welcoming offer to immigrants and their children. You acknowledge their interest in not necessarily bonding, but talking to them. And you say, if you tell me you're an immigrant or a child of immigrants, we're going to spend some time together because I will want to hear of the ways you've had to stretch yourself to find your footing. And I thought that was really correct. But in terms of what immigrant experience is about in some ways. But I'm curious about what were those conversations like, both in terms of audience or your friends, or in terms of the feedback that you've had from the book? And do you think that it has somehow served as an opening or catharsis even for some people because of the descriptions and advices that you've written in your memoir?
Thank you. Thank you for that question, and thank you for that wonderful and generous introduction. Honestly, yeah, like it's been really exciting to get to talk about this book with a lot of people. But one door that I've been really grateful for has been the way that other people want to talk about their experiences. It's been really interesting hearing from older immigrants, people who have been in North America for say 30 or 40 years,
Mm.
who told me, you know what, these were things that I stopped thinking about a long time ago. And this book kind of brought me back to revisiting some of those questions. That means a lot to me. That means a lot to me because some folks have, they consider themselves having moved on past their immigration narrative, if you will. And then something about the way that they engaged with the book brought them back to thinking about the early years, what it was like to struggle with belonging, what it was like to sort of ask some of these questions of yourself and maybe not necessarily find the answers, because like we don't always find the answers. I've been so grateful to sort of listen to other people's immigration stories, and they talk about, when a new place started to feel like home, how they sort of managed to bridge the gap between where they are now and where they have grown up. And some people were like, I feel really guilty about not having bridged the gap enough, actually, because I sort of sunk myself into life here and I stopped thinking about what life over there is like.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think like every time that somebody shares these stories, like it just feels like to me, it feels like a gift. I feel a little bit better because I'm like, yeah, I'm working through these things too, and I don't know
Mhm.
if I found an answer, but it's so great that you're thinking about it.
Mm. And you, I mean, we'll talk about it later, but you also write incredibly. I mean, I told you before, I was both a refugee once and I'm an immigrant now. So I saw a lot of both myself, some of the ideas of both what my cousins their families might have gone through in terms of both the relationships within families and among families in these diaspora communities, and then the relationship between people in diasporas with the home countries, so to speak, or old home countries, because we then get new home countries in a way. But you do write also that it took 2 stopovers and 19 hours of total flying for me to become Black. I left Khartoum as a popular and charming and modest preteen, and I landed in Canada with 2 new identities, immigrant and Black. And you write very candidly about all these commotions throughout the years. What was interesting for me particularly was the way that you write about how it was hard for you to quote unquote compute that you were now Black in Canada. One of the reasons was because you grew up with your primary identity being Arab, as you thought over there, or you told yourself. So can you tell us a little bit more about those complex notions in candid observations, I guess, about both the conversations within Canada, but also what you share in terms of the conversations within Sudan too, and references to Sudanese people, shadisms. That was really fascinating for me.
Of course. So growing up in Sudan, of course, I didn't realize this, but like Sudan has like a deep history of shadism and colorism, a deep history of sort of racism against darker skinned folks. So when I grew up in Sudan, being a Muslim living in Khartoum, that meant that like the identity that we talked about most was Arab. You know, we were Muslim, we spoke Arabic. That was our proximity. We sort of, you know, like all my life in Sudan, I've sort of been, that's the identity that's been reinforced. And the counter to that was sort of the Black identity was the one that belonged to South Sudanese people, darker skinned folks who lived in South Sudan. And to me, like that was my understanding of who Black people are. And so moving to Canada and suddenly kind of finding myself surprised with that identity being given to me, being sort of belonging to me. That was something that is new. And I didn't, first of all, I rejected it at first. I said, no, like I've lived in a place where there are Black people and I'm not in that category. That's sort of how I understood myself at first. And so I ran away from this identity of Blackness. And then I think I rejected it in part because where I grew up, like I grew up just with that natural racism around me everywhere. And so I certainly took some of those narratives with me, and I sort of understood that to be what is Black. It took a little bit of time here to sort of come to a larger, and I think more universal understanding of what Blackness is and the ways that it's kind of, you know, moves in a different context here and there, especially North American Blackness, because the Blackness that I saw on TV was a Blackness.
Ja Rule.
Well, exactly. It's sort of a hip hop kind of Blackness in a town that is predominantly white. My only access to seeing Blackness represented was Ja Rule, was hip hop on TV. And because I grew up in a conservative sort of Muslim home, I kind of thought, well, there's no way I'm that. Like whatever that is, I don't know how I could be associated with that. And so that made it really easy for me to not call myself Black.
And speaking of, Ja Rule, but not just Ja Rule, I'm particularly interested about just a little bit more about that idea and your opinions about American Blackness, as you say it, because you write of it as a complicating factor because of its omnipresence and one-dimensional story of Blackness that dominated that pop culture, as you mentioned a little bit in the early aughts. But yes. I'm curious about both. You said a little bit about how you have felt, oh, I'm not that, when it was perceived or, you know, put out there as to be just that. But how have you dealt with that omnipresence as you were growing up? And do you think that maybe you have felt more implications of, I don't know if the right word is having to, or like these tendencies by societies to label or to put in boxes? Have you felt more of that, do you think, because of your work in the media later on, or has that even not been a factor because you became more like self-confident in your own identities that you kind of forged yourself? How did that work in your case?
But at first, yeah, it was this exactly this idea of saying I don't want anything to do with blackness because this is the only kind of blackness that I saw. But it took a little bit of time for me to see that this was not the only possible presence of blackness in North America. But so at first, I ran away towards things that now we would consider sort of stereotypically white. Things like heavy metal music, things like watching wrestling. Those are sort of you might call them white culture in a sense, or at least like some people have in reference to this book. But the way that I ran away from that idea of blackness, there was also a force that brought me back, which was like a little bit later in university. What I saw that actually like the blackness that I'm getting on TV is but a sliver of various representations of blackness, many of which I can and do call home. And so, but that takes time. That takes time for you to find your own iteration, your own relationship to blackness. Because at first, I only saw it as something to run away from, to sort of reject in that way. And so I was grateful for the people in university that I encountered who expanded the possibilities of what blackness is for me. And now it's like it's not particularly complicated to me in the sense of like I am a black man. I don't know. I'm also an Arab man, but I'm a black man, and I feel comfortable in my own iteration of blackness. I don't need to sort of bend it to be something that I see on television or otherwise. But that's a process of sort of growing into yourself, right? That's sort of a process of finding your own rhythms with that identity.
And music has been, you told us how you embraced wrestling and a new nickname that you kind of carried on from school all the way to at least first year of college, if I remember well. And then you write about the place of music in this complex, non-linear process, as you say, of understanding the puzzle of being Black in the West, as you wrote it. And it was interesting for me how you write also about that romance with the American South, as you say, precisely because you complicate, but so candidly and genuinely, like you just say, this is I tried to like hip hop, then I didn't like it, and then you understand and you acknowledge the complicated history of the South, but then your love for country music, right? And can you tell us a little bit more about that aspect of music in particular? Or just this romance with America in general?
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit of that chapter. So the one of the chapters you're talking about there is a chapter of Infinite Reach, which was it's titled after an operation that America carried out under Bill Clinton's administration to bomb the El Shifa factory, which was a sort of a significant medical factory in Sudan. It's one of when it was bombed, it was producing like a significant amount of medicine that Sudan needed to deal with malaria. And it was also not very far away from my house, so I the night that Shifa factory was bombed, I thought I was going to die because, like there was this factory nearby that was sort of being bombed to pieces. So I grew up with America being this sort of boogeyman, if you will, this idea, this kind of like a world villain of sorts. So it was frustrating to me to then end up sort of falling in love with a lot of very specifically American culture pieces, right? But chief among them, I'm talking about country music, I'm talking about the American South, places where I have spent some time. I've visited a lot. I write, part of my job is to write about country music. These are things that I spend a lot of time thinking about and engaging with. I don't arrive at a conclusion in the book, and I think that's by design, which is to say, this is complicated for me too. I think there are elements of country music that remind me of Sudanese music, and so I go, well, there's something that we have in common here, but I don't know what it is, and I sort of keep trying to unearth it. But I don't deny myself the pleasure of connecting with a sound or a culture or an idea just because it feels like it should be contradictory. I sort of allow myself this is complicated that I connect with this, but I'm also like, I seemingly am fully on board with this. to me, that is a part of being human, is sometimes liking something and not really sure why you like that thing, or feeling very strongly that perhaps you shouldn't like this thing, that it wasn't made for you, but still you find yourself kind of turning towards it.
And all of this was precisely the reason why I asked, did you kind of get a feeling, or I mean, did this serve as a catharsis? Because to me, everything that you say seems like almost a permission to other younger people, immigrants or not, to say these things that maybe they're feeling, but not being able to voice loudly because of all sorts of, I don't know, stigmas, or again, boxes that sometimes ourselves or the society puts us in. So speaking of reactions, before I forget, I'm curious, how were the reactions to your book in Kingston, which is the town where your dad first immigrated in Canada, and specifically because you speak about it in terms of overwhelming whiteness and how it was not the easiest place to settle as an immigrant. So how did you get any reactions from readers from Kingston?
I did. I did. And the reaction has been overwhelmingly positive, mostly because, it's true that the very first few pages describe Kingston as this like overwhelmingly white place. But then so much of the book takes place in Kingston, or on the way to Kingston, or on the way out of Kingston, that eventually you sort of begin to see that, I hope so anyway, that you begin to see that I have so much love for this place, a place that has shaped me so deeply, that it is in fact true that it's overwhelmingly white, but it's also definitely true that it has shaped so many of my experiences, so many of the ways that I felt really contained, and then all the ways that I felt really free. All of those happened in Kingston, so that there's a nice variety there. You're holding in your hand the American cover of the book. The Canadian cover is different, but on the American cover, on the American cover, kind of to the right, you see the outline of Kingston City Hall. Yeah, that's a Kingston City Hall, and like to me, like makes me really proud that my hometown's City Hall is represented, on the cover of this book. That's something that makes me really happy. I've heard from so many folks that I know and love in Kingston that the book really connected with them, but also showed them how a city they've known their whole lives could look and feel different in the eyes of another person, and to me that felt like a gift.
Yeah, and it reminds us of the power of good writing. And I really, 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 really enjoyed this book for many reasons. And I'm trying hard not to give too many spoilers about everything that I want to say. And
Sure.
when you're like, oh yeah, I remember that other nickname. Anyway, in chapter 6, you start kind of, well, it felt dramatic in a way, like kind of grandiose, with a sentence about, quote unquote, a profound act of generosity when one person carries the dreams of millions on their shoulders. So here I was reading it and I'm thinking, okay, what historic figure is he going to start about talking now? And then you tell us it is about Mohamed Salah, the Egyptian soccer player, and then you say he came out of nowhere. You write that he volunteered himself to realize the dreams of Muslims, and I laughed so much about that because I know what you mean, but I was wondering, can you tell our audience a little bit about the importance of Salah, both for you as you see it for yourself, as a soccer fan, or for other Muslim boys, men, or people in general?
For sure. First of all, it's I feel profoundly lucky, I really do, to live in a moment where Mohamed Salah is not only the best footballer on the planet, but also the most famous footballer on the planet, and he's a Muslim man from Egypt. I think I'm very well aware of how rare that kind of moment is, right? Like I'm very well aware of not taking something like that for granted. I think it'd be easy to. But I sort of return to my youth and the representations of Muslims that I saw around me at the time. And predominantly the representations of Muslims that I saw around me were on TV anyway, or anywhere that is, were on the show 24 when they were being the terrorists of season 3, season 4, and season 5 of a show like 24. You don't know that you miss seeing positive representations of one of your identities until you see it fulfilled in front of you, right? Until you sort of see what you could be seeing, like the sort of the beautiful ways that you could be seeing. And there's a few songs that people sing about Muhammad Salah. It's kind of like fascinating to sing, to watch, like white teenagers from Liverpool singing about Muhammad Salah and how they want to be Muslim too because of him. There's something that kind of comes over you that's like that you just never thought that you would see something like this. That's it doesn't strike you as real life, because at least for me, because the only representations again that I grew up with were sort of those negative representations. Have there been famous Muslim athletes before? Of course there have. But he's the most significant one of my lifetime. And I say all of this, but also will add to all of it that I am an ardent and longtime devout fan of Liverpool as a club. And so that, I think that like complicates my image a little bit further, so I'm very complicit in this. I don't claim to be unbiased. But there was a really interesting report the year after Mohammed Salah arrived in Liverpool, and there was a rise in hate crimes everywhere across the UK, and this report noted that one year, there was a dip in hate crimes against Muslims in Liverpool, and you sort of see it as like a, can you claim that it's 100% because of him? No, I think like no data scientist would ever allow that to happen. But can he be given a little bit of the credit? I think so. I think I would like to do that. So I'm just grateful to be working and writing and thinking during a time of Mohammed Salah being the best footballer on the planet.
Yeah, I love how we're talking about soccer on Wednesday morning. I never love soccer because of my dad. But have you heard? Also, there were also sociological studies or even articles afterwards. Or there were some events with, I think it was Mehmet Ozil, the Turkish soccer player who played in Germany, and some scandals when, was it him, I think, who said the famous sentence, like, when I score, I'm a star. When I don't score, then I'm an immigrant. And then the xenophobia kind of resurfaces again. So sociologically, these dynamics are so complicated. In European societies, maybe elsewhere as well, I don't know. But I see what you mean in terms of that public, and he's actually devout, or he practices openly, right? Or he prays. So that kind of also brings a new dimension to this public introduction.
He takes a moment to pray on the field after he scores the goal sometimes, right? Like, I mean, like, this is like a very sort of visible representation. And it's even more visible when you see, like in Egypt, they don't say Liverpool's playing today. They say Mohammed Salah is playing today. Like, he's the whole team. And I think that's really, to me, that's really moving. Like, it's really moving to have kind of taken one of the oldest football clubs in the history of the game, and have remade their identity anew to be around this one guy. I think like that's really special.
Yeah, and I think that he also, by the way, carries a burden of a different sort in Egypt, where I think my colleague Kareem has written about it in one of our newsletters in terms of the reactions and backlash that he would get in Egypt. I think it was around Christmas, where he maybe just had like a photo with his family behind, or
he had a Christmas
tree or something like that. So there was a backlash there. So there's like a lot of sociological different dynamics that are happening over there, and I mean over in UK and in Egypt as well. But thank you for sharing all those insights about media in US and Canada post 9/11 as well, in terms of, and you write about 24 and Homeland, and you share some personal insights about Islamophobic mail that you've been also getting on a regular basis. Does that still go on?
It's not as frequent as it once used to be, but also I'm not as good at checking my email as I used to be. So
yeah, you're not. But you're good.
Yeah.
So, in terms of your descriptions, I mean, so much can be learned in terms of your descriptions of relationships with your parents at different times of your life. And when you were 12, when you were 15, when you were 17, of course, shaped by your own unique personal experiences and things that cause these ups and downs. And you use a beautiful metaphor of a highway, which I never thought about before. But now, trust me, when I'm on the road, wow, I think about all the stuff that we actually do while we're in a car on highways that we don't register. You can, if you want, just tell us a little bit about that. And just, I want to add that there is a stunning passage at the end of your book, kind of a homage almost to immigrant parents. And you say they aren't born that way. You write, they're created by the battle they wage against the forces lined up at their door, threatening to take what they hold dearest. And there's much more. I don't want to like read. I want people to read your book, but it's beautiful because they've tried so hard and they've left so much behind. And so I was curious, could you share a little bit about both the meaning of the highway for you and this idea, or actually has becoming a parent yourself changed the way you think about your parents, immigrant parents in general?
Of course. With regards to the highway, highway is the 401. It's a highway that connects Montreal all the way to the Windsor-Detroit border. So it kind of runs through all of Ontario. It's a significant highway for me personally because it's the highway that connects Kingston and Toronto. But it's also even more meaningfully, it's the first place that I saw when I landed in this country. And we left Toronto Pearson International Airport and we went to Kingston on that highway. And so many of significant moments in my life when I start to line them all up happened on that highway, whether it's arriving in this country for the first time or the first road trip that my dad took us on after we arrived in this country, or like the first time that I snuck out of the house to see my then girlfriend, now wife, because she was sick in Hamilton and my parents wouldn't allow me to go, or the time that I was sort of tearfully moving out of my parents' house and leaving the city and their reaction to that and leaving at that, or the time of standing in a parking lot looking at this highway hoping that my dad would come to my wedding and he doesn't come because at that point his relationship with me being married to this woman was not very positive, and we kind of fixed that later. So there's all these significant moments and they all sort of took place on or around or about the highway. So they'll tell you a little secret, which is like that essay, those essays about the highway, there's 5 of them. As you sort of keep reading the book, they kind of keep returning. So you read a couple of essays and then you return to another highway one. But they were written at the same time. It was just one long piece that was sort of, I think, ended up being about 12,000 words or so. And when I finished writing this piece, I sort of both knew that it was really important and that I couldn't, in good faith, put it all together at the beginning of the book. It just seemed so overwhelming to me. It'd be hard to sort of read a 12,000 word essay right at the start of this book. And so I began splitting it up, and as I split it up, it sort of lined up nicely with some of the other themes. So it's like you read a little bit about coming of age and like writing wrestling fan fiction, and then you return again to the highway kind of thing. That's the highway piece. It's just like it seemed like the obvious sort of through line to me of what the book should be, and so we made it the through line. With regards to the immigrant parent passage, it's hard for me to think about and even revisit because I think I didn't treat my parents with the kindness that they deserved. Mind you, I'm not saying that like my pain was invalid. I think it caused a lot of pain during those teenage years, but I wasn't looking at the right problem at the time. I think I wasn't seeing what they were responding to. I thought it was about me when in fact it was about everything that was outside of their door. And I understand that a little bit more meaningfully now because I am a parent. I'm a parent of a 5-year-old, and there are intentions and then there's a reality in terms of the lessons that you think you'll be able to teach your kids, the ways that you'll end up thinking I can definitely infuse these ideas into my children's lives, and then reality creeps in. It's actually like much harder than you think it's going to be. I empathize. I really empathize with what they were up against. I would have gone about it a little bit differently, but I see a lot more of where they were coming from than I did back then.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, yeah, yeah. And another, I mean, you just finished this book in like amazing bombastic way. You're just emotional, like roller coasters. I felt almost really, again, maybe because I feel it personally at the end, I got goosebumps at the end when you wrote about this feeling of estrangement when you visited Sudan in 2009 and then later on. That idea of not feeling, I mean, Son of Elsewhere is the title for a reason here. And so I wanted to ask you, as we approach the end of this conversation, both about how that dynamic, how is that boiling within you right now, where you're at the moment, and just if you allow me to read just a few sentences because it's so powerful, that I loved. And you write, you have to let yourself be reminded that a part of you is rooted in another place. Face what is missing, the empty crevices that once contained what you now lack, an old way of greeting, a pronunciation of your name that is at best an approximation of the real thing, and say thank you, for it is because of this deficit that you know yourself. Oh my God. Elsewhere is a conscious choice to remain in the incomplete. Tell me how, and how do you feel about this now? And because, like you said once earlier on, I appreciate it, and I won't give a spoiler, but it's kind of the tone of the whole book where you're embracing and giving the freedom and acknowledging the uniqueness of each experience.
Mm-hmm.
And when you say, you know, well, if somebody wants to pronounce their name that way, I'm not going to judge. I'm not going to go say, do it that way, because there's probably a reason. That's gracious. And I hope that many readers might kind of be inspired by it, because you point at something that necessarily not everybody does. But I'm wondering about, have you been to Sudan? How do you feel about this? You feel more comfortable? And I know that it's a process, at least in my case as well. So
Yeah.
how does that elsewhere feel right now? If at all it can ever be fixed. I don't know. I don't think so. I don't know.
No, I don't think it can be fixed.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a sort of a magical place to be. I think there is kind of a checking in with yourself every morning and be like, where am I today? And the answer can absolutely be different from day to day. But I think that's the part that I want to embrace. I want to embrace the volatility of it. I sort of want to embrace the inability to settle in like, okay, when you ask me about my identity, here's like the very specific good answer that I can give, because it's okay to sort of be in turmoil about it. It's okay to sort of wake up one morning and say, wow, I'm feeling much more distant from this identity than the other identity. And allow that to be the range of your experience, right? Allow that to be like, that's what it feels to be human. I think we have sometimes a desire and maybe a tendency to want to reduce ourselves in order to be understood, you know, in order to, when somebody asks you, hey, like, well, what's your background? You want to give like a simple answer. Of course you do. Everybody wants to give a simple answer. But I think I'm trying to say with this book, like, you know what? Sometimes the answer is not simple, and it's okay for you to sort of exist in the complex space. You don't owe anybody simplicity. You don't even owe that to yourself, right? Like you're allowed to, as the final sentence of the book says, sort of live on the suspension bridge. And some days are windier than others. You're like, I'm kind of in the middle. I don't really know which direction I'm going to go in tomorrow. That's a bit of what I was trying to do, is sort of complicate these categories, these categories that we are so firmly holding on to, and just kind of be okay with, just a rock and roll of it all, you know? Yeah.
Hey, Elamin, thank you so much for. I mean, this book has been kind of therapeutic for
Thank you.
me in a way. It's beautifully written, and for all of those who are immigrants, kids of immigrants and not, it is a great opportunity to learn in a beautiful way and get inspired, or just see through somebody else's eyes the world in front of them. I appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time. And to all of you, check this book out. This conversation will be posted on all our social media platforms next week. You can follow Elamin on all his social media platforms as well. Stay tuned for more good talks with people from all over the globe. Again, have a good day. And thank you, Elamin, once again for joining us.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the great conversation.
Hope that I can meet you for coffee when I get to Toronto to visit my cousins.
Please do. Absolutely.
And you can hear, yeah. And actually, Toronto is a huge immigrant community, as many of you know. So plenty of stories over there. Anyway, have a good day, everyone. See you next week.